The conflict dynamics between Iran and Israel are not just regional tensions confined to the Middle East. They have measurable and documented consequences for the United States, particularly in terms of financial commitments, military operations, and economic ripple effects. As of the latest verified data from 2023 and 2024, the United States is deeply involved, not as a direct combatant against Iran, but as a strategic ally of Israel and a stabilizing force in the region. This involvement carries significant and traceable cost. One of the most concrete financial commitments is the long-standing military aid agreement between the United States and Israel. Under a 10-year Memorandum of Understanding signed in 2016 and active from 2019 through 2028, the U.S. provides Israel with $3.8 billion annually in military assistance. This figure is officially documented by the U.S. Department of State and represents one of the largest sustained foreign aid packages in U.S. history. When adjusted using official inflation data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, this annual commitment rises to approximately $4.5 billion in 2024 dollar value, reflecting the real economic weight of this support over time. However, routine aid is only part of the financial picture. Following the escalation of violence in October 2023, which involved Iran-backed groups such as Hezbollah and various militias operating in Iraq and Syria, the United States Congress approved an additional $14.3 billion in emergency military assistance to Israel in 2024. This supplemental funding is verified through congressional records and includes allocations for missile defense systems, ammunition replenishment, and broader military readiness. These figures are not estimates or projections. They are legislated expenditures that directly tie U.S. taxpayer funds to the evolving security situation influenced by Iran-Israel tensions. Beyond direct aid, the United States incurs costs through its military presence in the region. According to the U.S. Department of Defense, approximately 34,000 American troops were stationed across the Middle East in 2023. This deployment includes bases in countries such as Iraq, Syria, Qatar, and Bahrain. The presence of these forces is partly a deterrent against escalation involving Iran and serves to protect U.S. interests and allies, including Israel. However, maintaining such a presence requires substantial logistical support, including transportation, equipment maintenance, and personnel costs. While the Department of Defense does not publicly break down the exact cost of each deployment in relation to specific conflicts, it confirms that operational readiness and force protection measures have increased following attacks by Iran-backed militias. These attacks are another verifiable factor contributing to U.S. costs. Pentagon briefings confirm that between October 2023 and early 2024, U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria were targeted more than 150 times by Iran-backed groups. Each of these incidents triggers defensive responses, including missile interception, base fortification, and in some cases, retaliatory airstrike. These actions are not hypothetical. They are documented military operations that require real resources, equipment usage, and strategic planning. Although exact per-incident costs are not publicly disclosed, the frequency and scale of these attacks indicate a sustained financial burden on U.S. military infrastructure. In addition to military expenditures, the Iran-Israel conflict indirectly affects the U.S. economy through global energy market. The Middle East remains a critical hub for oil production, and any instability in the region can influence global supply and pricing. Following the escalation in October 2023, Brent crude oil prices rose above $90 per barrel, according to data from the International Energy Agency. This increase has downstream effects on the U.S. economy, including higher gasoline prices, increased transportation costs, and inflationary pressure. These economic impacts are not isolated. They influence monetary policy decisions, consumer spending, and overall economic stability. Another layer of cost comes from strategic deterrence. The United States has deployed additional naval assets, including aircraft carrier strike groups, to the region as a show of force and to prevent further escalation. These deployments are confirmed by Department of Defense announcements. However, the exact cost of operating a carrier strike group for a specific mission tied to Iran-Israel tensions is not publicly itemized. Therefore, it must be stated clearly, no verified data is available that isolates the cost of these deployments specifically for this conflict. Nonetheless, their presence represents a significant allocation of military resources. In summary, the financial and operational impact of Iran-Israel tensions on the United States is multifaceted and grounded in verifiable data. From billions in military aid and emergency funding to increased troop deployments and economic effects driven by oil market volatility, the costs are real and documented. These are not speculative figures. They are drawn from official government reports, defense budgets, and international energy data. The United States may not be directly at war with Iran, but the strategic implications of the conflict translate into tangible expenditures and economic consequences that continue to evolve with the situation. Building on the documented financial commitments and military presence outlined earlier, another critical dimension of how Iran-Israel tensions affect the United States lies in the escalation-driven operational costs and expanded military activities across the Middle East. Verified data from a 2024 analysis associated with Brown University's Costs of War project, cited by the Associated Press, confirms that the United States has spent at least $4.86 billion 2023 to 2024 specifically on increased military operations in the region following the October 7, 2023 escalation. This figure is separate from direct military aid to Israel and reflects the cost of expanded deployments, defensive operations, and maritime security missions. These operations were initiated largely in response to threats from Iran-backed groups, including militias in Iraq and Syria and Houthi forces in Yemen. The U.S. Navy, for example, has been actively engaged in protecting commercial shipping routes in the Red Sea, where Iran-aligned Houthi forces have launched attacks on international vessels. These missions require sustained deployment of advanced naval assets, including destroyers and carrier strike groups, along with continuous surveillance and interception operations. In parallel, the total U.S. military aid to Israel has surged significantly since the beginning of the conflict cycle tied to Iran-backed actors. According to verified reporting, the United States has provided at least $17.9 billion in military aid to Israel between October 2023 and October 2024, inflation-adjusted. This represents the highest single-year total of U.S. military assistance to Israel in modern history. This funding includes a combination of foreign military financing, direct weapons transfers, and drawdowns from existing U.S. military stockpiles. The aid encompasses a wide range of military equipment, including artillery shells, precision-guided bombs, air defense components, and logistical supplies such as fuel and spare parts. Importantly, these figures are based on compiled research using government disclosures and defense tracking, and researchers explicitly noted that full transparency is limited, meaning the $17.9 billion figure may not represent the complete total. Another verified financial and strategic cost to the United States involves weapons stockpile depletion and replenishment cycles. When the U.S. transfers weapons directly from its own reserves to Israel under emergency drawdown authority, those stockpiles must later be replenished through new procurement contracts. This creates a secondary financial burden that is reflected in future defense budgets rather than immediate expenditures. For example, billions of dollars from supplemental aid packages are specifically allocated to replenish systems such as the Iron Dome and other missile defense platforms. These replenishment cycles are a documented and recurring cost mechanism within U.S. defense logistics, although exact long-term totals tied specifically to Iran-Israel tensions are not fully itemized in public data. Therefore, it must be clearly stated, No verified data available for the total long-term replenishment cost directly attributable to this conflict. The economic impact on the United States also extends into global trade security and maritime insurance costs, although precise quantified figures remain limited in public disclosures. The Red Sea and surrounding waterways are among the most critical global shipping routes, facilitating a significant portion of international trade, including energy shipments. Attacks by Iran-aligned groups on commercial vessels have forced the United States and its allies to increase naval patrols and escort operations. These actions are confirmed by defense reports and independent research, but the exact financial burden on U.S. taxpayers for these maritime security operations is not fully broken down in official public documents. As such, the correct factual statement is, I cannot confirm verified data for the exact cost of U.S. naval operations specifically tied to Iran-Israel-related shipping threat. Another layer of cost comes from intelligence and surveillance operations, which are critical in monitoring Iranian activities and supporting Israel's defense planning. Verified reports indicate that the United States has been deeply involved in intelligence sharing with Israel, including satellite surveillance and operational coordination. A confirmed 2024 intelligence leak revealed that U.S. agencies such as the National Security Agency (NSA) and National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency (NGA) were actively providing detailed intelligence related to Israeli military planning against Iran. While the financial cost of these intelligence operations is not publicly itemized, their existence demonstrates a high level of operational involvement that requires advanced technological infrastructure, personnel, and continuous funding within classified budget. Additionally, the conflict has influenced U.S. arms sales and defense industry activity, which are formally documented through government approvals. For instance, in 2025, the United States approved a $3 billion arms sale to Israel, including thousands of heavy munitions and advanced weapon systems. These transactions are recorded as part of official foreign military sales programs and represent both a strategic commitment and an economic activity within the U.S. defense sector. While such sales generate revenue for defense contractors, they also tie into broader geopolitical commitments that may lead to further military and financial obligations. It is also important to distinguish between verified financial costs and areas where transparency is limited or data is incomplete. For example, while total aid and certain operational expenditures are documented, there is no publicly verified, comprehensive figure that aggregates all U.S. costs specifically attributable to Iran-Israel tensions. This includes combined costs of military deployments, intelligence operations, economic impacts, and long-term strategic commitment. Government reporting structures typically categorize these expenditures under broader defense and foreign policy budgets, rather than isolating them by specific geopolitical conflict. In factual terms, the Iran-Israel conflict affects the United States through a combination of direct expenditures, operational costs, and systemic economic impacts, all supported by verifiable data from government reports, academic research, and defense analyses. However, due to the complexity of military budgeting and classified operations, the full financial scope cannot be precisely calculated using publicly available verified data alone. This limitation is acknowledged by both government agencies and independent researchers, reinforcing the importance of distinguishing between confirmed figures and areas where data remains unavailable or restricted. Another critical and fully documented dimension of how Iran-Israel tensions impact the United States is through macroeconomic pressure, energy security concerns, and domestic financial effects, all of which are supported by verified data from U.S. and international institutions. While military aid and operations represent direct government expenditures, the broader economic consequences affect both federal policy and everyday American consumers. One of the most clearly measurable channels is the global oil market, where geopolitical instability in the Middle East has historically triggered price volatility. According to the International Energy Agency, IEA, and the U.S. Energy Information Administration, EIA, Brent crude oil prices rose above $90 per barrel in October 2023, immediately following the escalation involving Israel and Iran-backed group. This price movement is officially recorded and reflects market reactions to potential supply disruptions in one of the world's most critical energy-producing regions. The United States, although one of the largest oil producers globally, remains integrated into the international energy market. Therefore, increases in global oil prices directly influence domestic fuel prices. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, confirmed that energy prices contribute significantly to inflation calculations, particularly through gasoline and transportation costs. When oil prices rise, it increases the cost of goods movement, airline operations, and manufacturing input. This, in turn, creates inflationary pressure, which affects interest rates and monetary policy decisions made by the Federal Reserve. While the Federal Reserve does not attribute policy decisions to a single geopolitical event, official statements confirm that energy price volatility is a key factor in inflation monitoring. However, it must be clearly stated, no verified data available that isolates the exact percentage of U.S. inflation caused solely by Iran-Israel tensions. Another verified economic impact involves the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, SPR, of the United States. The SPR is a government-controlled emergency stockpile of crude oil intended to stabilize supply during disruptions. According to the U.S. Department of Energy, the SPR has been used in recent years to mitigate price spikes, including releases during global supply concerns. While there is no official statement confirming a release specifically due to Iran-Israel tensions, the existence of such geopolitical risks influences policy decisions regarding reserve levels and future replenishment strategies. The cost of replenishing the SPR depends on market prices at the time of purchase. Therefore, higher oil prices, such as those observed in late 2023, can increase the financial burden on the U.S. government when rebuilding reserves. However, no verified data is available that directly links a specific SPR expenditure to this conflict alone. In addition to energy markets, the conflict contributes to global trade uncertainty, particularly in maritime routes such as the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz. These waterways are essential for the transport of oil and commercial goods. Verified defense reports confirm that Iran-aligned Houthi forces have targeted commercial vessels in the Red Sea, prompting the United States to increase naval patrols and establish multinational security initiatives. These operations aim to ensure the safe passage of goods, but they also introduce indirect economic costs. For example, shipping companies may face higher insurance premiums due to increased risk, and some routes may be diverted, leading to longer transit times and higher fuel consumption. While these effects are recognized in global trade analysis, no verified publicly available data quantifies the exact cost impact on the U.S. economy specifically attributed to Iran-Israel tensions. Another important aspect is the impact on U.S. financial markets and investor behavior. Historically, geopolitical instability in the Middle East has led to short-term volatility in stock markets, particularly in sectors such as energy, defense, and transportation. For instance, defense companies often see increased investor interest during periods of escalation due to anticipated government contracts. These trends are observable in market data. However, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and other regulatory bodies do not attribute market movements to a single cause in official reports. Therefore, while correlations exist, the correct factual position is: I cannot confirm verified data that isolates stock market changes solely due to Iran-Israel conflict dynamic. The conflict also influences U.S. federal budget priorities, particularly in the allocation of supplemental funding. As previously documented, Congress approved significant emergency funding packages in 2024, which include military aid to Israel as well as broader regional security measures. These expenditures contribute to the overall federal deficit, which is tracked by the U.S. Department of the Treasury. According to official Treasury data, the United States continues to operate with a substantial budget deficit, and additional spending, regardless of category, adds to total federal debt unless offset by increased revenue or spending cuts elsewhere. However, no official Treasury report isolates the exact contribution of Iran-Israel-related spending to the national debt. Another verified but less visible cost involves cybersecurity and homeland security measures. U.S. government agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security (DHS), have issued alerts regarding potential cyber threats linked to Iranian actors, particularly during periods of heightened tension. These warnings are documented in official advisories. In response, federal agencies and critical infrastructure sectors increase cybersecurity readiness, which involves additional spending on monitoring systems, personnel, and defensive technologies. While these actions are confirmed, the specific financial cost associated with heightened cybersecurity measures tied to this conflict is not publicly disclosed. It is also necessary to highlight the human and veteran-related costs, although these are less directly tied to financial figures in public reporting. Increased military deployments and operational tempo can lead to long-term obligations related to veteran care, healthcare services, and disability compensation. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs (VA) manages these programs, which are funded through federal budget. However, these costs are typically calculated over long periods and across multiple conflicts. Therefore, no verified data is available that isolates veteran-related costs specifically resulting from Iran-Israel tensions. In strictly factual terms, the economic impact of Iran-Israel tensions on the United States is broad, systemic, and partially quantifiable, with verified data supporting key areas such as oil price fluctuations and government spending. At the same time, significant portions of the total economic burden remain unquantified in public data, particularly where costs overlap with broader defense, trade, and financial systems. This distinction is essential to maintain accuracy and avoid unsupported conclusions. All confirmed figures presented are derived from official institutions, while all unverified areas have been explicitly identified as lacking publicly available data. The final dimension of how Iran-Israel tensions affect and cost the United States lies in the long-term strategic, budgetary, and defense planning consequences, all of which are grounded in officially documented policy frameworks and government data. Unlike immediate expenditures such as emergency aid or operational deployments, these long-term costs are embedded within multi-year defense strategies, procurement cycles, and alliance commitments. According to the U.S. Department of Defense (DoD) budget documents, the United States allocated $816.7 billion for national defense in fiscal year 2023, making it the largest military budget in the world. While this figure is not exclusively tied to Iran-Israel tensions, official defense strategy reports confirm that the Middle East remains a priority region, particularly in countering Iranian influence and maintaining Israel's security. Therefore, a portion of this budget is structurally influenced by the need to respond to threats associated with Iran and its regional network. A key long-term financial mechanism is the Foreign Military Financing (FMF) program, administered by the U.S. Department of State. Through this program, Israel receives consistent funding to purchase U.S.-manufactured defense equipment. The previously confirmed $3.8 billion annual aid package, 2019 to 2028, is part of this framework, ensuring predictable funding flows over a decade. This arrangement not only represents a sustained financial commitment but also shapes U.S. defense production cycle. American defense contractors rely on these agreements to plan manufacturing output, workforce requirements, and supply chain logistics. While this creates economic activity within the United States, It also locks in long-term fiscal obligations that are directly linked to maintaining Israel's qualitative military edge in a region where Iran is considered a primary adversary. Another verified aspect is the prepositioning of U.S. military equipment in Israel, officially known as the War Reserve Stockpile for Allies, WRSAI. According to U.S. government documentation, this stockpile contains billions of dollars worth of military equipment, including ammunition, armored vehicles, and medical supplies. These assets are owned by the United States but can be accessed by Israel under specific conditions, particularly during emergencies. When Israel draws from this stockpile, as has occurred during periods of heightened conflict, the United States must later replenish it through new procurement. This creates a recurring cost cycle that is directly tied to regional instability. However, no verified public figure is available that quantifies the total cost of WRSAI replenishment specifically linked to Iran-Israel tensions. The conflict also influences U.S. global force posture adjustments, which are documented in defense strategy publications such as the National Defense Strategy (NDS). These documents confirm that the United States continuously evaluates troop distribution, base locations, and readiness levels in response to evolving threat. For example, increased tensions involving Iran have led to the reinforcement of air defense systems and the repositioning of naval forces in strategic areas such as the Persian Gulf. These adjustments require funding for transportation, infrastructure, and sustainment. While these costs are included within broader defense budgets, they are not itemized by individual geopolitical trigger. Therefore, the accurate statement remains: no verified data available that isolates the cost of force posture adjustments solely due to Iran-Israel conflict dynamic. Another long-term cost factor involves missile defense collaboration and technological development. The United States has co-funded multiple Israeli defense systems, including Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow missile defense programs. These collaborations are confirmed through congressional appropriations and Department of Defense report. Funding for these systems includes research, development, testing, and evaluation (RDT&E), as well as production and deployment. For example, U.S. contributions to Iron Dome have totaled several $billion over multiple years, as documented in congressional budget justifications. These investments are strategically aimed at countering missile threats from Iran and its allied group. However, no single verified figure aggregates total U.S. spending on missile defense systems specifically in response to Iran-Israel tensions. The United States also incurs costs through diplomatic and foreign policy operations, although these are less frequently quantified in financial terms. Agencies such as the U.S. Department of State and U.S. embassies in the region engage in continuous diplomatic efforts to manage escalation, coordinate with allies, and negotiate security arrangements. These activities are funded through the federal budget, but expenditures are categorized under broader diplomatic operations rather than specific conflict. As a result, no verified data is available that isolates diplomatic costs directly attributable to Iran-Israel tensions. Additionally, the conflict has implications for U.S. homeland security preparedness, particularly in the context of counterterrorism. Official statements from agencies such as the Department of Homeland Security and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, confirm that periods of heightened Middle East conflict can increase the risk of retaliatory or inspired threat. In response, federal and local agencies may elevate alert levels, increase surveillance, and allocate additional resources to intelligence and law enforcement activities. While these actions are documented in official advisories, the specific financial impact of these heightened security measures is not publicly itemized in a way that isolates this conflict alone. It is also necessary to address data limitations and transparency constraints, which are consistently acknowledged in official and academic sources. Many aspects of military and intelligence spending are classified or aggregated into broader budget categories, making it impossible to calculate a fully comprehensive cost of Iran-Israel tensions on the United States using only publicly available verified data. Research institutions such as Brown University's Costs of War project emphasize that even their detailed estimates may not capture the complete financial scope due to restricted data access. Therefore, the most accurate conclusion based on verified information is that the total cost to the United States is significant but not fully quantifiable with publicly disclosed data. In strictly factual terms, the long-term impact of Iran-Israel tensions on the United States is reflected in sustained financial commitments, defense planning structures, and strategic military investments, all supported by official government documentation. Confirmed figures, such as annual aid, supplemental funding, and overall defense budgets, provide clear evidence of financial involvement. At the same time, substantial portions of the total cost remain unverified or undisclosed, particularly in areas involving classified operations, indirect economic effects, and multi-year strategic adjustments. This distinction ensures that all conclusions remain grounded in verifiable data while clearly identifying the boundaries of publicly available information.